It's 90 minutes after 9. Now, the First Minister has spoken to US President-elect Donald Trump for the first time since he secured his return to the White House. We're told the phone call was initiated by Trump's team and lasted around 20 minutes. During the call, John Swinney, who backed the Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, he stressed the importance of trading and cultural ties with the US, while Mr. Trump, whose mother, of course, was from the Isle of Lewis, expressed his love of Scotland. So what might a second Trump presidency mean for our country? And should we roll out the red carpet? Well, I'm joined by Ian Houston, who's an honorary professor at the University of the West of Scotland and an advocate for diplomacy and trade, who's now resident in Washington, and Tom Scotto, who's an American living in Scotland and professor of politics at Strathclyde University. Let me ask both of you in turn. Ian, first of all, should we be rolling out the red carpet now?
Well, good morning, and same to you, Tom, and your listeners. I think perhaps it's the blue carpet. I think that,
of course,
yes. So on my desk here, I have a quote from President Abraham Lincoln that says, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." And so for me, Scotland holds the wheel, it holds the pen. The integrity of the brand of Scotland remains strong and inspiring. So political figures come and go. But the story of Scotland, business, culture, universities, tourism, sport, all the manifestations of Scotland needs to continue to be told in this unwavering way, consistently across the world's political and geographic spectrum. And so, from my standpoint, the reality is that Donald Trump has clearly been elected president by a majority in a free and fair election. And the American people and the nations of the world, even though it may be difficult for some, need to accept that and then tactically engage with an incoming administration without conceding what it believes. So quite the opposite for Scotland. Scotland has every reason to be confident in its unique identity and its global message. It's a wonderful story to tell and to be proud of. And so that's effective diplomacy. And I think the UK and Scottish leadership, elected officials, understand that.
It's a difficult one, isn't it, Tom? Because if you're a politician in Scotland, you obviously want to work with the US president and you want to get the best deal possible. But at the same time, you don't want to just ditch all your principles. And it's interesting, the Scottish Green co-leader Lorna Slater was urging John Swinney to stand up to Donald Trump and called for his climate-destroying and racist politics to not be part of Scotland's future. How should the First Minister play it? Should he raise all these concerns about the climate, for example, or is the best thing to do to just shut up and just do the trade deals?
Well, not immediately, and I think we also have to remind ourselves that, trade is not a fully devolved power in Scotland. So a lot of the negotiations that will be going on with Westminster. And it's important, though, I think Swinney, not only for Scotland, but for the rest of the UK, can make a clear point that Americans like Scottish whiskey and Americans like travel to Scotland for tourism, for university, and it benefits no one to get into. So you can say that in a gentle manner without, quote unquote, standing up and creating the antagonism of a relationship from the beginning. If you're going into a challenging situation, whether I'm at work or at a university, I don't immediately, go to DEFCON 5 in terms of saying. I think that if we rewind a little bit, it may be worth, for the future, the enduring relationship for the Scottish government or politicians in general to consider whether or not, openly endorsing a candidate is really in their place in a foreign country. Really, would Scotland should be happy, as my colleague said, that we had an open and free and fair election in the United States. In many ways, it was a bit of a relief that the legitimacy of the election didn't come under such challenges as it had in the previous two races, right? And just to sort of say, well, was that the brightest of ideas to sort of openly endorse Harris? Because elections are often can be unpredictable.
But does it matter? Because David Lammy for the UK government, he said some pretty insulting things about Donald Trump, and they had a meeting, and everything now seems to be okay. Isn't it the case that Trump can kind of forget a lot of these past as he would see indiscretions and actually just get on with business?
I mean, good politicians, good people. I'm not saying necessarily, but Trump is not necessarily known for having often the ability to brush things off as well. So but any politician, it's a wider question, I think, in terms of choosing sides when it really is that the politicians in the UK, the UK's place, much like any election, I would just basically say, well, we would hope this would be a free and fair election, and it's really up to the American people or the French people or wherever, and we look forward to dealing, to welcoming or being open to whomever the people, the citizens of that country choose.
Let's move on to what Scotland could get out of Donald Trump, how Scotland could benefit. Ian, we know that Donald Trump's a very transactional politician. Can that benefit Scotland in any way?
I think what's very important is to be mindful of Scottish whiskey and the tariffs potentially. Yeah, if we think transactionally, tactically, strategically, very important to have a relationship with the Trump administration, not just an individual, but the administration across the board, State Department, trade, commerce, etc. Because the agreement related to Scottish whiskey and the tariffs that were put in place, while they were lifted, those lifts were temporary. And so there is a real possibility that the tariffs may be reinstituted because the agreement was for 5 to 6 years and that expires in 2026. So President Trump has said that he has gravitated to how tariffs can be, from his perspective, effective to the United States. So we just need to ensure that dialogue is strategic, tactical, informative, and that we don't have a repeat of a situation of tariffs that impacted Scottish communities to the tune of £500 million, if not more. So I think it is very important to be strategic. I also would say to your audience, when we think of an individual and we think of the ports of entry for politics and economic and cultural engagement with America, it needs to go through cities, states, localities. Scotland needs to keep thinking about cultivating relationships with these figures at this level: governors, mayors, legislatures, city officials, chambers of commerce. And there's a real capacity for Scotland, Global Scots, Scottish alumni, Friends of Scotland, to work through these Scottish connections that we have. The Scottish government in the USA here is doing a great job. Scottish Development International, consulates, the British Embassy, St. Andrews Societies. There's a real capacity to engage on a local level.
Is that how you see it ideally working, Tom, that maybe we focus too much on Donald Trump, the individual, when actually there's lots of important relationships going on behind the scenes?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. You have chambers of commerce, you have all sorts of, I think one of the biggest challenges potentially for a second Trump term is the leader of the Senate has been Mitch McConnell, and he's a senator from Kentucky, who has a lot of interest in the whiskey trade. So there was a bit of, there was a lot of working through the United States Senate, which has to approve all treaties constitutionally, right? So you have particularly the states of Tennessee, the states of Kentucky, where there's a big trade and a big sort of symbiotic relationship in terms of the trade of whiskey barrels and so forth and so on. I think this sort of para diplomacy is very important, the sub-state diplomacy. So I agree 100% with Ian.
Ian, much is made of Trump's love of Scotland. Do we play on that, or does that not really factor into the equation if Trump is all about the art of the deal?
We do, absolutely. And again, it's not just about Donald Trump. When we think about this new Scottish Connections framework that the Scottish government has developed, which is really fantastic, it's helping us to develop a roadmap for engaging with the emotional appeal that people have. It lays out a cohesive sort of cross-cutting approach to engaging with the diaspora, of which he is a member. But keep in mind, we're talking about 25 to 30 million individuals who have some connection, blood connection to Scotland, but the universe of Scottish University alumni, friends of Scotland, we're talking a huge number, Graham. It's appealing to that emotional side. Absolutely. I think for Donald Trump, he needs to, and for those who have a love for Scotland, they need to understand the contemporary, innovative, entrepreneurial, progressive, modern side of Scotland, the economic side of it, the opportunities in Glasgow and Edinburgh and Aberdeen and Inverness. And that is something I think that all of us, it's incumbent upon us to educate individuals, including Donald Trump, about the opportunities that go beyond golf. As great as golf is, it's, as you know, much more complex. Many more opportunities exist.
Yeah, and of course we also have to factor in the unpredictability of a Trump presidency as well. But Ian Houston, honour professor at the University of the West of Scotland, and Tom Scotto, who's an American living in Scotland and professor of politics at Strathclyde University.
The time is 9:30 and this is Good Morning Scotland with Graham Stewart and Hope Webb.